Hello and welcome to the YYC Soccer Podcast. My name is Jason Kmet and my co-host is Scott Strasser. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Jason. Thanks as usual for having me on. I'm pretty excited for this episode, and I think it will be one of our most listened to ones yet, just considering what it's about and who we managed to interview for it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we've got a good one ahead. But before we go too far into that, let's just do a quick review here. If you're a new listener, what is YYC Soccer all about?
Right. So we are going to focus on soccer in Calgary at the amateur, collegiate, and professional levels. We will talk about the teams and the players from the city's soccer community, whether it's the grassroots and amateur leagues and teams or the university teams, all the way up to the professional level.
That's a great segue there regarding professional level. We are going to be talking today a lot about Cavalry FC, and their season starts on Saturday when they visit Forge in Hamilton. After a few games on the road, they're going to go to Spruce Meadows and have their home opener on April 30th versus Valor at 3 p.m. And for this week's episode, we interviewed Tommy Wheeldon Jr., the head coach and GM.
Yeah, it was great to get to interview Tommy, who I can only imagine is a very busy guy these days. So kudos to you, Jason, for securing that interview, and kudos to Tommy as well for putting a pretty decent chunk of time aside to do the interview with us.
Yeah, I agree. It's nice that he had a bit of time to talk to us, and I'm looking forward to tracking down some other people in upcoming episodes as well. So we'll see how it all goes, but I was pretty happy that we were able to get Tommy on before the first game of the season.
Definitely.
Before we play the interview with Tommy, I want to run over the 7 new players that are joining the Cavs this season. Maybe we should just go through them one by one and we can discuss them really briefly. And Tommy does talk a little bit about some of them during the interview. So let's just start it off. You want to start off with the goalkeepers there, Scott?
Yeah, because there are 2 new goalkeepers coming into Cavalry's roster this year, starting with Sterling Kerr. So if you watch local U Sports soccer, you will know who Sterling Kerr is. He's a starting goalkeeper for Mount Royal University, and he's coming to Cavalry on a U Sports deal. He has played for Cavalry's U21s before, so he's worn the Cavalry jersey, but this will I believe be his first professional team that he's been with. And then the other new addition is Joseph Holiday, and he's also he's coming on a developmental contract. CPL fans may remember Joseph Holiday as FC Edmonton's 17-year-old debutant in their very last game as a CPL club last year. He was still 17 at the time, and he did get a cameo in their 3-1 win over Valor. He's still only 18 years old, so I mean, I don't know if he'll see the field for Cavalry at all this season, but a great opportunity for him to watch from the bench, watch players like Marco Carducci and maybe Sterling Kerr as well, and see how they kind of approach the game.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that it's a fantastic opportunity for someone that age to be in that environment. I think it could do wonders for his development, and you're right. Maybe we will see him see the pitch at some point this year, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. Now let's go over to defender. Kellen Montgomery is a 25-year-old center back from Vancouver Island, and he's got experience starting in the NCAA. He was an All-American his final year, and then he was the 4th overall pick in the 2019 MLS Super Draft by FC Dallas. I don't think he really ever played too much for Dallas. He was loaned out right away to San Antonio in the USL. And then he was traded to Minnesota United. And then at that point, he was loaned out to San Diego in the USL. Also wanted to mention that while he was in college, he did play for the Victoria Highlanders when they were in the PDL. And he did play that 2018 season when Calgary Foothills won the title. So he definitely has some familiarity with the coaching staff and some of the players already.
Yeah, I think there was an interview or there was an article on the CPL or One Soccer website a few months back where he was talking about how he'd lost a few times to Tommy Wheeldon Jr.'s teams, his Foothills teams in that 2018 season. And he was excited at the prospect of playing under him now. So neat to see him return to Alberta this time to play for a team here. Another center back who has joined Cavalry is Udoka Chima. He's a center back, seems to be replacing either Mason Trafford or Karifa Yao. He is 21 years old. He's 6'3", so he's definitely bringing some size. He spent time with Burnley in England with their youth academy. And he also has experience with Nigeria's U19 national team. So curious to see how he comes in and has an impact, taking over some big characters and some big names.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. He's a big guy, and when you look at it, he fits the bill for the body type of a central defender that you want to have these days. But we'll see how it all plays out. But yeah, certainly there seems like there's some potential there. Let's go over to midfield and let's talk about Jesse Daly. He is a 25-year-old central midfielder. He is Australian and he comes to the Cavs from Brisbane Roar, which is his hometown club. He's from Brisbane. He made 54 appearances for the club in the A-League, which is the top Australian league.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a different A-League than the one that you're familiar with, Jason. But Yeah, but anyway, moving on, another midfielder who has joined Cavalry, and I've noticed he's been quite involved with their promotional materials thus far, so I feel like he's very enthusiastic to be here, is Shamit Shome. He's 25 years old, primarily a central midfielder. He is from Edmonton, and last season was with FC Edmonton. He also, I believe, started his professional career with FC Edmonton in the NASL in 2016 before he got his big move to, they were still called Montreal Impact at the time, but his big move to MLS. And he did make over 50 appearances in MLS, which, of course, Tommy alludes to in our interview before he returned to FC Edmonton and the CPL last season. He played against Cavalry as a member of the Montreal Impact in the inaugural 2019 season. So I know he's been to Spruce Meadows. And he also has 2 senior men's national team caps with Canada, and also spent time with some of the, I think it was the U17 and U20 teams as well.
Yeah, U20 for sure, and you're probably right about U17, but he was in some of the youth setups for sure. And let's wrap it up here at forward. This is the 7th and final edition we have right now, and that's Ethan Beckford. He's a 23-year-old striker. He started out at Toronto FC Academy and spent a little bit of time at TFC 2. Then he went on to play some university soccer, NCAA, at Penn State. And after he finished off at Penn State, he's been with Simcoe Rovers of League One Ontario. And his numbers are pretty good. I'm pretty impressed with this. He scored 15 goals in 17 league appearances and 2 goals in 2 playoff appearances. So that's a nice ratio if you're a striker.
Yeah, and I think League One Ontario has, it's become such a strong, I don't know if you call it amateur or semi-pro league. I think it's more semi-pro than amateur, but yeah, I mean, to be scoring that many goals in almost a goal a game in that league, like you're going to turn some heads at the pro level.
Absolutely. I know a little while back, Scott, I checked out the League One Ontario website, and instead of just looking at what was on there right now, I went back into the archives and I actually went back and looked at the stats, the team by team stats for, like, I can't remember if it was the 2019 season or something like that. And you scroll through the stats and there are a lot of familiar names on those rosters. Now, admittedly, some of the players didn't play necessarily the complete season, but you see Tajon Buchanan, I can't remember how many games he played, but he played like a half a dozen games one year in League One. And the names are crazy when you look at it. That there's been so many players that have passed through that league. Some of them were stars. Some of them only had a cup of coffee, but there's been a lot of really quality players that have gone through that system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on here, and we're going to run our interview now with Tommy Wheeldon Jr. I'd like to welcome Tommy Wheeldon Jr. to the podcast. As I'm sure most of you know, Tommy is the coach and general manager of Cavalry FC, and we're going to chat a little bit today about the upcoming season, which is right around the corner here in just in a few days' time. Thanks for joining us, Tommy.
It's a pleasure to be on, and great that you guys are venturing out and doing this podcast. So it's nice to have more people telling the story of the good things that are happening in and around Calgary.
So let's start off here. Scott, you want to get the ball rolling?
Yeah. So I'll ask the first question here, Tommy. Thanks for being with us.
Regarding the player departures from last season and the additions this season, I noticed that there have been more departures than additions so far. I think 12 departures and 7 new additions. I was curious if that means that fans are going to be seeing more player announcements coming in.
Well,
the days to come.
Good question. And sometimes the numbers don't often tell the story, because if you think of last year, we actually had more than the 23 players on roster. And the only reason being we had season-ending injuries to Novak, to Tom Field, and even Fraser Ed. So we had to withdraw them from the roster, and then we made more additional signings. So in order to a bit of cap compliance, a bit of freshness, we will have 2 more of our U Sports contract signings to be announced, as well as 1 more key guy that quite well known around Calgary that will be announcing at the end of his contract in Europe. That'll probably be for the beginning of May. So, but other than that, nothing significant. It was just a numbers game. And I said last year we had more than we needed, and a lot of guys on contract. So we had to make sure we were cap compliant and also manage the budget of what we wanted to achieve this season too.
So, Tommy, can you talk a little bit about the 7 new additions to the club this year?
Sure.
What do they bring to the team, and in general, talk about the new additions?
Yeah, do you know, at the end of each season, when you look at it, it's always that reflection stage. So you look at it and you think you're always disappointed in losing the last game of the season, because that generally means you're either not in playoffs or you are in playoffs and you've been knocked out of it. And for us, it was the latter. And the manner in which we'd gone out, where it was a 1 goal and sendings off, there was always that controversy, and we were a bit tired of being on the wrong end of those controversial decisions. So we actually said, right, we got to put more control in our hands. So what is it we're missing? And what we looked at is the early season injuries really did set us back a bit. We went flying through the middle season, reaching a club record of 11 games unbeaten. Arabin Pepper was scoring goals. Victor Lutori playing well for us. But when in doing so, they've also attracted attention overseas. And part of the club philosophy, for us, we define winning behaviours is finding young local talent, giving them an opportunity to succeed. And this is something that's very big, and why Spruce Meadows and the Southern family got involved in this was basically that, is can we help Canadians be successful? And it's even sweeter when it is local products that Luton Town comes putting an offer for Arabim and Ross County for Victor Lutori, and we knew that was an opportunity for the players and for the club to move them on and then bring through the next batch. What probably ham-tied us a little bit was the fact that it was mid-season. So it's never an ideal one to do it, but it was one that, now we're seeing Victor getting included into the Canada squad of the last window. It was the right thing for the game. And I think when you have a greater good like that, it makes sense. So, but in doing so, we lost their bit of dynamism, and we lost a bit of chemistry, and chemistry matters in the last, the running. With Victor's legs in there and Arabim's goal threat, we needed to replace that. We feel in Ethan Beckford, we've got a goal threat that's very similar to that. Whilst a little bit older, he offers a very similar profile to, say, Amaya Bevan, where he's dynamic, he's aggressive, he presses, he can score any type of goal. In Jesse Daly and Shamit Shone, we've got 2 players that have both got high-level experience. Shamit Shone, we forget, has been in part of the Canadian national setup. He's played 50-odd games in the MLS, and then you look the same with Jesse Daly, who's played in the Australian A-League, but also got experience here in North America. Both of them add energy to the midfield that we think is good. And then when, you have some, defenders retiring, or Karifa Yao, getting transferred to Vancouver Whitecaps, we needed some holes at the back. With Callum Montgomery, we feel he's a player that adds athleticism, balance with the left side, and again, another one that can, fill the void of, say, a Mason Trafford in a different way. And Adoka Chima was one that we felt was a profile very similar to Karifa Yao, that, with a little bit more work and coaching, we can help his game develop. So we've been, quite happy with that. And then we've seen the growth of our younger players that are within our system that we sampled a little bit last year, that we feel we've invested our time and energy, and they'll pay us back this season with some good performances.
On that note of Victor Laturi and Arabin Peppel, Tommy, do you think that's a risk moving forward, that you're maybe going to have to consider losing some of your top players every season in a league like the CPL? Or is that something you feel might be avoided this
No, I think this one, Scott, is part of the club philosophy. So we redefined, what does winning look like? We've made more sales and players moving on. And you can go back from, you look at Mo Farsi now playing well for Columbus Crew. You look at Joel Waterman playing regularly for Montreal. We spoke about Victor and Arabin. Look at even Dominic Zator. We put him into that bracket, who's a lad that spent a lot of time with us in our development system and doing well. We want to prepare our guys for success. In the first round, while we're still a young league, we have to develop a trading history. So we have to have players like this that we can now reflect on. And the recruitment of Oliver Minitel as he retired to come back as our head of recruitment can help with identifying these young international players we want to bring over, but also alerting clubs of the upcoming profile that we want to move on. Once we've got a trading history, the strategy is that we can then be selective with when we sell them. Now, because the calendar year is different, because we play through, I guess, the calendar year of, May through to October, for example, whereas the European schedule is different. They're finishing in May and starting again in August and play through Christmas. It overlaps. So we got to make sure that we're conducive with the needs of the Europeans, but also drive up enough interest that it's not just one or two clubs at the door. There's 5 or 6. And then that means we can then be selective on when we sell our players. But it'll always be part of our strategy. It's now we've got to develop that trading history to bring it forward so we can then dictate the terms, not vice versa.
On that note, Tommy, I want to ask you something about transferring players. Was it really the case in the first year or two when a player you were looking at moving a player on, that maybe one of the problems was there was no real comparables? Like if you had someone who was a good player in the CPL, other teams in Europe, for example, they wouldn't know exactly what that meant, like how it was comparable. Do you think that's happening now that the league is 5 years old?
Yeah, I think now you've got data points to suggest, you're looking, Baloo Tabler's gone on and done well. There's been other players from other clubs that have moved on overseas, but we, again, trade in history. But I tell you, the biggest thing, Jason, is the media deal. I think there's probably not enough credit given to, Media Pro, the Spanish company, that actually invested money to take the rights of Canadian football. And then what they do is, I've got family in England that will see the Canadian Premier League on the local channels. So now suddenly people, when the off season, so when that summer hits and there's no football of the Premier League or whatever, they're able to switch on. And my cousins are watching games, and that then makes us look more of a professional. So, I think the USL league is a very good league, but it's streamed on YouTube, and the quality of it is nothing in comparison to the Canadian Premier League. And I said, like I said, a lot of work has to be, a lot of credit has to be given to Media Pro for that, because it makes us look more and more professional. And then you put the signage, you put, you guys is now everybody as the journalist is telling a story. It makes it better. And then, clubs from overseas are getting to know us. And the fact Canada men's qualified for the World Cup again, people are like, oh yeah, there's some good players. And, Alphonso Davies is playing right now against Man City. And, for Bayern Munich, won the Champions League. Jonathan David's flying as one of the hottest strikers in the world right now. And then you got Stefan Eustáquio playing well. And the list keeps going. Tajon Buchanan, Alistair Johnson at Celtic. These are all Canadians. And now I think the rest of the world are going, actually, that's a really good well to fish in. So, yeah, it's driven some great interest.
Tommy, we've asked you about the new incoming players, but what would you like to talk about with regards to the returning players, some of whom, like Marco and Jose, have been with Cavalry since the start?
Yeah, I believe we're up to about 14 returnee players. So that's why I said the numbers tell a bit of a different story, because what we wanted to do is, even some of the lads we're bringing through onto U Sports contracts is they've been within our system. And I think as our products have shown with our under 21 players, once you know our system, and we've shown it years back when I was at the helm with Calgary Foothills, is it takes time to learn a system, no different than, kids going through school trying to learn algebra. You got to learn a system, tactics and philosophies and culture. It takes time. So that's been good. The existing players are our cultural leaders. So you look at Marco is important, our originals, Jose and Sergio in there. And then you look at players like Dan Klomp and, Ali Musi that have been, with the club for 3 years. You look at, Fraser Ed coming back in this year will feel like a new signing. Roberto Alacon and Mickey Cantave joined us mid-season, and, fans will have seen little bits and gone, oh, they were good, but they're looking sharper and sharper with the preseason they've had. So what that cultural core does is allow us to be able to keep developing chemistry on the pitch, keep developing our community, our outreach, events like we went to Red Deer to do a camp out there, to Genesis up in the Calgary Northeast. We feel that as a obligation that our team must pay it forward and help the community of Calgary develop. And what's great now is the longer these players are here, Jose Escalante coaches with Southwest United, Sergio Camargo coaches with Mackenzie United, Marco Carducci coaches with Calgary Villains. So it's great to see these players developing our core, but developing a greater good of just this team.
For our next question, I wanted to ask about the preseason tour in Portland. How did the trip go, and how did you feel after watching the performances in the games there?
Good. We chose a bit of a different strategy. So last year, we were hit with some heavy injuries. I think there was 4 players that were significantly injured over preseason, and some was because of the off season's way too long. So we adjusted our off season, and credit to our sports scientist Alex Potts and our medical team, and Leon Hapgood, who's our assistant and technical director, created an off season program for the guys to have them return fitter. That's allowed us now to not have any significant injuries leading into this season. We went to Mexico last year and we played 3 games within 10 days. So it was hot down there. It was game after game, and then that stresses the body when they, have been not competing for 4 months. So what we chose this time was go down to Portland. One of the reasons being is very similar to the Vancouver Island type of weather, where we're there quite early. We'll play against teams like Seattle Sounders' affiliate Tacoma Defiance, who are about to start their season. They'll be fitter than us. They'll be organized. We'll play the NCAA teams. Portland Pilots are, got a terrific stadium and training ground. That's where we were camped. And also got a very good team that always has a run in the NCAA. But they're fit, they're aggressive, they're well coached. And again, they were ahead of us. So what it does is it stretches us and it makes us play under a bit of pressure. It was great to see that, a team that was fit against us in Tacoma, they took an early lead, 1-0. We made some changes at halftime because, you only really play these guys about 45 minutes at that stage of preseason. Second half, we've done really, really well. Started, dominating the game and won 2-1. Then the game against Portland, and then between that, we've obviously had a lot of time to work on tactics, to work on unit meetings, to work on culture. We took the boys to an NBA game. The boys got to shoot a hoop on the Trailblazers after the game, which was a really cool experience. And then to finish off with, after 10 days of training, we wanted a really hard game against a fit team. So we played Portland Pilots. We tied them after 90 minutes. They stretched us, which was good because the boys were starting to be fatigued, and no one other than Marco were at the 90-minute mark. We asked Portland to play an extra 30 minutes because we had some of our younger players with us, and we wanted to see how they would fare under stress. And to be honest, they gave us, some answers. Some of it was good and some of it wasn't. And the game ended in 3-2 after overtime. So all in all, it was really good because in order to develop that resilience that you need through a regular season and through playoffs, is you've got to stress the players out in a healthy way without a risk of injury. And I think the Portland trip did just that. We've returned home. We've played Valor. We played Vancouver Tigers. I can say after those 4 games now, we're starting to find a little bit more of a groove. And there's no better place now than Tim Hortons Field to see where we're at as we go through our journey.
And speaking of Tim Hortons Field, Tommy, this will be my last question of the interview, and I do want to kind of take you back to the playoff series against Forge last year, and I know you alluded to those games in your first answer with in terms of like the red cards and the injuries that Cavalry had throughout the season. But is there anything you feel that Cavalry needs to do to just take that next step in the playoffs and win one of these CPL championships?
Well, there's 3 tournaments to circle this year. This year's every year playoffs change. So with it, it's very hard to plan for a strategy of how to do well in playoffs when the structure keeps changing. So what we've got to do is focus on the small victories. And what I mean by that is every team we play 4 times. So like any hockey or NBA series, can we get the best of our series? So last year, it was Ottawa beat us in the series, right? And hence why they end up winning the league. If we'd have won one of those games, we're 2 points off of first place, which gets us the league championship this year and a berth into CONCACAF. Going then into playoffs, you actually have a different side of the draw, which is different than ever before, where 1 versus 2, the winner goes to the final, the loser goes to, almost like that second round there. So it's going to be very, very interesting on how you finish. And if you finish 5th, you've got the Cinderella run to try and face where things are going to be harder and harder. So the hard thing in a roundabout way is to try and find a process when we don't know how that process has worked, because we've never done it before. But what we do need to do is, look, we can talk all the day about the referee's emotional decisions on the cards. Yeah, we're going to feel unjust until the day I die. However, we've got to score more goals than the other team and stop them scoring. That's what we can control. So what we focused on, there's some great dynamism in our attack that we need to do. And then we've got to have resilience in our defense to, win these cagey games 1-0 or 2-1. That's the difference. We're not far, so we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but it's those marginal grounds we've got to try and find.
Okay, thank you very much. That was, like I said, my last question, but maybe Jason, do you want to end the interview with one last question?
I'm sure we could talk all day, but I think we've kind of hit a lot of the main points, and we're starting up the season this week, and before you know it, the home opener will be upon us. So thanks again very much, Tommy, for taking the time. It's Tommy Wheeldon Jr., head coach and general manager of Cavalry FC. Thanks again, Tommy.
All right, thanks for having me on. All the best, gents.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks again to Tommy Wheeldon Jr. for joining us. Any key takeaway points you'd like to address, Scott?
Yeah, I'd say it was a really good interview. One I think Cavalry fans in particular will appreciate listening to in this, lead up to the start of the CPL season this upcoming weekend. I felt Tommy was quite candid and detailed in his answers, and it's quite clear that he and his coaching staff have done a lot of reflecting after the way last season ended, and they put a lot of thought into how they wanted to prepare for this season, whether it was the players that they were getting in or where they, going to Portland for preseason, that kind of thing. I remember as I was listening to his answers, I just felt it was kind of hard to believe that the CPL is now entering its 5th season. It feels like, not that long ago that I was covering Cavalry's 2019 preseason or heading to Spruce Meadows for that inaugural game against York 9, as they were called back then. It's great that the CPL has lasted as long as it has. It's already nearly lasted as long as the old Canadian Soccer League of the 1980s and 1990s. And it's just great to see that longevity. And I think it seems to only be growing as well when you see the success stories that have already emerged, the players who have gone on to play for bigger and better clubs in Europe or MLS. So yeah, it's a great time to be a soccer fan in Calgary, and I think the CPL has played a big role in that.
Absolutely. I think the CPL has done wonders for the game in Canada. I know some people probably are hoping that we'd see flashier names and that sort of thing, but I think right now what they've accomplished, and they've really achieved the mandate that they talked about getting young players and fitting into their place in the pyramid. I think that mission has been achieved thus far. And I think, yes, there's lots of room for growth still, but I think it's on the right track.
Yeah, me too.
And Scott, before we wrap up here, I am looking forward to seeing who the mystery, well-known local player who's joining the club soon. That should be interesting.
I agree. I think you and I both know who it is. And all I will say at this point is that if you follow YYC Soccer on Twitter and you look back at some of the recent tweets and the replies on that account, you should be able to suss out who it is. If it's not that person, I'll be very surprised.
Yes, I would agree. And I think we probably should do a shout out if he's listening, Sean Clark. I believe he's the one who I retweeted. I want to remind everyone that the Canadian Futsal Championships are happening this week, Thursday to Sunday at the Seven Chiefs Sportsplex. Both of us are planning on attending, and we will provide some updates through Twitter and through our Substack account. The Substack account is just something, it's brand new, just created it, and it's going to be a place where we can put on some additional information about the Calgary soccer scene that can help supplement the podcast. There will be a link on the website that will connect you, or you can go there directly. It's yycsoccer.substack.com. we're going to put up a couple things like rosters of the Alberta teams and a little bit more information about the Alberta teams and a couple other things, anything we can find that's interesting of note that we want to post.
Yeah. And as I mentioned last episode, I live very close to the Seven Chiefs Sportsplex and definitely plan to get out there with my camera. So I'm really looking forward to shooting some futsal. And I just say to watch out for some of those shots on the YYC Soccer Twitter and maybe the website as well.
Thanks very much for listening to this episode of the YYC Soccer Podcast. You can subscribe to this podcast using all the usual podcasting platforms. Head over to our website at yycsoccer.com with more information on how to subscribe or to leave a question or comment. You can also follow us on Twitter at YYCSoccer403. Thanks for listening.